Welcome to the Antiquities Travel Guide. Follow us to different countries as we search for ancient artifacts. If you too wish to explore the ancient past through travel, we'll help you plan where to go, what to see, and how to best enjoy what you encounter. In this series of the ATG, you can accompany Mariza and me on our trek through England, homeland of the ancient Angles, Saxons, Romans, and Celtic Britons. Come on, let's go! Having rented a car from Herts, and still getting used to driving stick on the right side of the car and on the left side of the road, Mariza and I wound our way north through a plethora of roundabouts to St. Albans, a beautiful little town about 20 miles northwest of London. St. Albans is the site of ancient Verulamium, and Watling Street runs the same course as the Roman road that ran from Londinium to Verulamium, but we took the modern highway. Traffic is heavy around London, so it took us about an hour to drive there. We stopped off for a bite at a place called Waddington Road. So, London yesterday, Mariza. We went to 3 museums. How would you rate your experiences?
My favorite museum of the 3 was definitely the British Museum, just because of the variety and the amount of artifacts that they had. And I really enjoyed that they had artifacts from all over the world, rather than just from specific civilizations. The Petrie Museum was probably my second favorite, just because I enjoyed the different tablets and especially the jewelry. I thought that was unique. I haven't seen much ancient jewelry.
We're going to be going to 3 places today. First, the site of ancient Verulamium, which is here in St. Albans. And then we're going to be visiting the Welwyn Roman baths, after which we're going to go to Cambridge and visit the Museum of Archaeology there. You can find remains of the old city at Verulamium Park. We were surprised to see that this wasn't simply an archaeological park, but a public park, and one that the locals hang out at and enjoy on beautiful days like the day we visited. This place is gorgeous, and a great place to chill and enjoy nature.
Oh, they're so cute.
Okay. Look at them. But of course, we nerds were there to see the ruins. Before the Roman invasion, this area was inhabited by a Celtic tribe known as the Catuvellauni. In fact, Julius Caesar fought against them back in the year 54 BCE during his invasion of Britannia. He defeated them, but the Romans didn't end up staying at that time. After their defeat, the Catuvellauni built a new capital city here called Verulamium, meaning settlement above the marshes. There it stood until the Romans came back in 43 CE and took over the town, redubbing it Verulamium. This is where Boudicca comes into the story. I name-dropped her last episode when I told you she revolted against the Romans in the year 61 and sacked and burnt Londinium to the ground. Well, guess what? She did the same to Verulamium. Let me give you a little more background on her. The Britons, whom the Romans had subjugated, were not happy with the way they were being treated. The oppression of Roman provincial administration had become intolerable to them. Specific complaints were that the governor was a tyrant. He robbed the Britons of their property and possessions at every opportunity. He kidnapped their children and conscripted their men. Apparently also the procurator now was demanding the return of money that had been given by Claudius to influential Britons, acting as if it were only a loan. Boudicca was wife of the king of the Iceni, who was a client king under the Romans. But when he died, the Romans plundered his land, flogging Boudicca and raping her 2 daughters in the process. Boudicca, taking over as ruler of the Iceni tribe, then retaliated against the Romans in the year 60 or 61, being joined by other tribes. Boudicca and her daughters led their army into battle personally. Roman historian Cassius Dio describes the events this way. A terrible disaster occurred in Britain. 2 cities were sacked, 80,000 of the Romans and of their allies perished, and the island was lost to Rome. Moreover, all this ruin was brought upon the Romans by a woman, a fact which in itself caused them the greatest shame. But But the person who was chiefly instrumental in rousing the natives and persuading them to fight the Romans, the person who was thought worthy to be their leader and who directed the conduct of the entire war, was Boudicca, a Briton woman of the royal family and possessed of greater intelligence than often belongs to women. In stature she was very tall, in appearance most terrifying, in the glance of her eye most fierce, and her voice was harsh. A great mass of the tawniest hair fell to her hips. Around her neck was a large golden necklace, and she wore a tunic of diverse colors, over which a thick mantle was fastened with a brooch. This was her invariable attire. As you might have guessed, Boudicca was ultimately defeated by the Romans. We don't know the exact location of the final battle, but it was somewhere in the Midlands. The Roman forces were led by Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, who's recorded to have said to his men, "Ignore the racket made by these savages. These are more women than men in their ranks. They're not soldiers, they're not even properly equipped. We've beaten them before, and when they see our weapons and feel our spirit, they'll crack." After her defeat, Boudicca fell ill and died. Some say she poisoned herself, but her defeat marked the end of resistance to Roman rule in Britain for several centuries. After these events, Verulamium began to be built up by the Romans, and it ended up being the third largest city in Roman Britain, after Londinium and Carinium. Around the year 50, Verulamium was given the rank of municipium, which even Londinium didn't have. A municipium was the second highest rank of Roman city, following after Colonia. Rank had nothing to do with size, but more with location and strategic importance. The first colonia established in Britain was Camulodunum, modern Colchester, around 49 CE. Camulodunum was followed by Lindum, now Lincoln, and Glevum, Gloucester, at the end of the 1st century. In Colonia, inhabitants automatically became Roman citizens. Only one municipium is known to have been established in Roman Britain, at Verulamium. Residents received some citizenship rights, but not all. Magistrates and their families did, but only at the end of their time in office.
Right now, we're at the site of Verulamium, which is one of the largest Roman cities in Britain. The site includes the Hippocaust, the old theater, and the old city walls, which you can actually see right behind me.
In 79, a new forum with basilica, temples, public baths, and a theater was built in Verulamium and dedicated to the then Emperor Vespasian. By the year 140, the city was twice its original size, covering 100 acres. 2 fires, one in 155 and the other in 250, destroyed parts of the city. The remains of a gorgeous mosaic floor can still be seen in the park. They have it housed in a building in the middle of a field. It was once part of the reception rooms of a townhouse and contains around 200,000 tesserae. Those are the little tiles. There's a small museum at Verulamium Park as well. The Roman theater of Verulamium, built in about 140, is unique. Although several towns in Britain are known to have had theaters, this is the only one visible today. Religious processions, dancing, and entertainments like wrestling, fights with wild beasts, armed combat occasionally took place in the theater. Plays by Latin and Greek authors were also performed at religious festivals, as well as pantomime shows.
We are standing here at... We're here at the Roman Theater of Verulamium. It's right here behind me. This theater was built... It was active around 200 years, from about the 2nd century to the 4th century of the Common Era, and it went through several stages of development. But basically what you're looking at here, what's closest to us, this is the seating. This is where all the people sat, looking that way. And then behind that, where you see the pillar, there were 3 pillars there, and that's the stage where the performers perform. And then way in the back, I don't know if you can see it, that's the dressing room where the performers put on their costumes.
The spectators sat on simple wooden benches and had an almost circular orchestra in front of the stage where town magistrates and local dignitaries were seated. What makes it different is that it has embanked seating rather than an amphitheater design. By about 300, after some more redevelopment, the theater had the capacity to seat 2,000 spectators. Next to the park, we decided to rest and have a couple of ciders at a historic pub called Ye Old Fighting Cocks. It claims to be one of the oldest pubs in England. Coincidentally, this was the day they were holding their annual Fighting Cocks Festival, which featured live music. So that made it all the more special. In the late 3rd and early 4th century, during the persecution of Christians under the Emperor Diocletian, a Roman named Alban, who lived in Verulamium, gave shelter to a Christian priest called Amphibolus. After some conversation, Alban was converted to that faith. As legend has it, when the Romans came to arrest Amphibolus, Alban put on Amphibolus' clothes and gave himself up to the Romans, who took him to the temple in the city, where he was ordered by a judge to renounce Christ and offer sacrifice to the Roman gods. He refused and was scourged in an effort to make him recant. When he would not, he was put to death. Alban became the first Christian martyr in Britain, and in the Saxon period, Verulamium was renamed after him, St. Albans, which is the name it carries to this day. A short distance from Verulamium is Welwyn. In Roman times, it was a small Roman settlement. There sit the remains of the Dicketmead Roman Villa, as it is called, which was discovered in the 1960s. It was right near the Roman road, so some have speculated it was an inn of some kind.
And here we are at the Roman baths.
I'm pretty sure it's this way, actually.
Around the same time it was discovered, a motorway was due to be constructed right through where the bath complex was. So a steel vault was built over the bath in order to preserve it. Today you can access it through a tunnel which runs beneath the motorway.
Yeah, this is amazing. What's that?
Today is the 46th anniversary of this bathhouse being open to the public.
Wow.
Yeah. Tony Rook, and he still lives in the village. He's in his 90s now.
Oh, wow.
And in the early 1960s, he discovered these baths, or bits of it, in the local river, which is the Mimran across the way. As well as doing the dig, and as well as getting other people on board to do the digs and things, he also had to battle against the motorway being put right way through the middle of this.
It's a good thing that guy found us. They were about to build a highway across this thing.
So at that side of the Roman baths, there would have been a villa, and the workers of the villa this would have been their bathhouse.
About half the bath is on display. Unfortunately, most of the rest of the villa lies underneath the road. Cost of admission is £3.50. We'll be looking at a number of Roman baths during this trip, including an almost complete one, which will feature later in the series. This site is kid-friendly. There's all sorts of games and puzzles and other educational resources for kids. I tried my hand at this puzzle here, but had a little difficulty figuring it out. From there, we drove to one of England's best-known cities, Cambridge. It was a small town named De Ponte in Roman times, but there's not much left of that. Its fort was made of wood. No, we went to Cambridge not to see the ruins, but to visit the museums. Well, we hear it's closed, but we're inside the Faculty of Classics building. Our first stop was the Museum of Classical Archaeology, which is hosted by the Classics Department of the university. Let's see what's up there. Unfortunately, we arrived after it had closed for the day. Too bad, because it looked fascinating. After that, we decided to go punting on the Cam. What's punting on the Cam, you ask? It means taking a ride on the Cambridge River in a small, flat-bottom boat called a punt, which is propelled by a person with a punt pole. Can you say that 10 times fast? We found a little place called Cambridge Chauffeur Punts. In the old days, you might find an occasional punt on the river, but nowadays, it's a booming tourist industry.
Wait, is this all part of the university? Oh, wow.
So the university, Cambridge doesn't really have a campus.
Okay.
The university is spread throughout the city. And just on my right here is the main part of King's College. In the corner is probably the most famous building in Cambridge, the King's College Chapel. Has anyone been inside?
No.
Is it worth seeing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the second largest chapel in the world. They started building it in the 1440s. It took them 100 years to build. Anyone for a drink?
Is this a lot of boats to have out at one time?
It can get worse. It gets busier than this. But yeah, it's a fairly busy day.
Our guide and punter, Rob, was an encyclopedia of historical information.
Text, they think it was an Irish squatter, but they can't be sure. And then in front of us, on both sides of the river, is St. John's College. Founded by Henry VIII's grandmother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, in 1511. And the second bridge, slightly younger, slightly more famous, is the Bridge of Sighs.
After that, we met up with an old friend and colleague of mine, Laura Zucconi, Jackie as we used to call her in grad school, a professor at Stockton University, who happened to be on research leave in Cambridge when we passed through. We met at the Cambridge Chop Shop.
Jackie and I went to school together. We
At UCSD?
at UCSD, right?
I also went to UCSD before undergrad.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you were there before me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did undergrad there. Which college were you?
I was in Ravel.
Oh, you're.
Neighbors.
I'm working on Timna and essentially the history of Edom and how did it form as a kingdom, kind of in the wake of the Mycenaean collapse and all of that.
So how did you get arranged for this to be able to come here?
I was on sabbatical in 2013, and Bill Lubenow he's not just the senior most faculty in the history department at Stockton, he's the senior most faculty at Stockton, period. He was actually one of the founding faculty. And so he said, well, what are you doing for sabbatical? And I said, well, I'm going to go dig in Timna with Erez for a bit, and the rest of the time I'm just going to be here working. And he said, no, you're not, you're going to Cambridge. And I said, yeah, right. And he goes, no, you're going to be a fellow, apply, do all this. And I'm like, how am I going to be at Cambridge? And he's like, just do it. And so I put in, and it's kind of that system where if you know people that know you and the whole thing. So, because he's been a fellow at Cambridge since the 80s.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so he got me in, and so it's just been a recurring every year since then.
And then are you finding what you were looking for?
Everything, yeah.
After a lovely conversation, we headed over to nearby Newmarket, where we stayed at a hotel called the Rutland Arms. It didn't have AC, but the weather was temperate, so we didn't mind. The next morning, we had an English breakfast, which the hotel provided at no extra cost, and we went back to Cambridge to see one more museum, the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. It's of modest size, a Category 1, and consists of 3 floors. The ancient history buff will be interested in what is on the first floor. There are some Roman artifacts, for example, but the often overlooked and somewhat unfinished third floor is where the cool stuff is at. You'll find artifacts from ancient Egypt and the Near East up there. Lesser-known materials from ancient Jericho can even be found there. Then we hopped in the car and headed north. St. Albans, Welwyn, and Cambridge were a lot of fun. But of these, Cambridge was a special highlight, definitely one of our favorite places we visited on this trip, and I hope to return there someday. Subscribe to see our next episode, in which we visit all kinds of interesting places, including the Roman Villa in Piddington, the Jewry Wall in Leicester, the Yorkshire Museum, the Aldborough Roman site, and the Oriental Museum in Durham.